Welcome to episode 4 of the Brilliant Brand Show. In today's show, I break down rule number 2 for building a brilliant church brand. I'm glad you're here with me today. Welcome to the Brilliant Brands Show. I'm Justin Keller, former accidental marketer and creative director turned church branding expert and entrepreneur. Each episode, I'm unpacking the strategies that I've used to help churches all across America make their story, their brand visuals, and their marketing so brilliantly clear that it's impossible to ignore them. And now, it's your turn. I hope you're ready to challenge the way you see things, rebel against complacency, comfort, and conformity, and find your untold brilliance. Now, let the show begin. Welcome to episode 4 of the Brilliant Brand Show. I'm Justin Keller, your host. I just want to start by thanking you for joining me here today on this episode, and I'm grateful that you're giving me part of your day and letting me challenge you to do whatever it takes to build a brilliant brand for your church. And inside of this show, this is where I help you learn what it takes to make your story and your marketing strategies so brilliantly clear they're going to be impossible to ignore. Today's show has been a little bit harder for me to work on because in this one episode, it's hard to capture everything I want to communicate because this is the premise for how I created the Brilliant Brands framework. And it's really the thing that shifted a lot of things for me personally. And so I'm really excited about this one, even though it's been hard to work on, because I'm pretty sure that it's going to spark a new way of thinking for so many of you on how you communicate for your church. And then I think for others, it's going to do what it did for me. It just gave me permission to be okay with thinking different about how we communicate. So it's probably going to reinforce feelings that you've already had. Maybe you just haven't voiced it in this way. So I'm excited about this. I believe this episode is important, and it's going to help you see that what once worked for how we communicate for our church and how we built culture and the things we communicated externally, it no longer works. It's no longer the same, and the rules have changed. So we're going to get into that in just a second. But before we get into that, I just want to quickly mention the Brilliant Brands monthly virtual coaching that I have created for you. So this is something I'm super excited about. I've waited for probably about 5 years to do this, and I wanted to wait until I knew that this would add a ton of value to your lives as church creatives. I wanted it to be the type of coaching program and network that I would have wanted when I was on staff as a creative director. And so you can check that out at brilliantbrands.com/coaching, and you're not going to find any kind of cheesy church certificate by the time you get done with this or anything like that. This is, it's not an academy. It's just real hard knocks, like practical stuff that you need to know and that you need to learn when it comes to creativity and marketing for your church. So go ahead and check that out at brilliantbrands.com/coaching. All right. So today what we're going to talk about is the Brilliant Brands rule number 2. And the Brilliant Brands rule number 2 is from my book, Rebel Brands, which you can find at brilliantbrands.com/resources. But the rule number 2 is really all about communication, okay? And the rule is this: if it doesn't live everywhere, it doesn't live anywhere. I really do believe that as churches, it's too easy for us to just communicate what we think people want to hear. This is a place that welcomes everybody. We're hospitable. We believe in excellence. Like, we just throw out things that we think people want to hear and the things we're supposed to say. But I guess my challenge for you would be that maybe that was okay at some point. Maybe that worked for a while. But I don't believe that just communicating a bunch of fluff is the most effective way for us to communicate as a church. And if it's not truth, we shouldn't be communicating it. And that's where this whole promise, the whole, rule for building a brilliant brand came, rule number 2, which is if it doesn't live everywhere, it doesn't live anywhere. And I want to share with you, I guess, a little bit about why I believe so hardcore about this and why I think it's worth you even rethinking this as a church for you. And so let's do this. Let's stop thinking about a brand as just the voice, the visuals. And I kind of even want to reference the quote that I put in episode number 1, where I talked about, the former CEO of Disney, Michael Eisner, when he said, a brand's a living entity. I want us to stop right there and just think about our brand as a living entity. So, I'm a living entity. You're a living entity. So think about your brand and as a person right now for the sake of this conversation. And when I started to think like that, it changed something for me because what are the rules for relationships? What are the rules for communication in relationships? What are the things you can get away with, things that you can't get away with? And what if we thought like that about our brand? And I know that this is a little different way of thinking for some of us right now, but just go with me here. Because what happened for me is when I started to think about a brand as a living entity, and I started to see it as a relationship between, the organization, let's say, or the company, and the audience. And the audience can be team members, staff members, volunteers, your city, your community. When I started to see it as a relationship between, one living entity to other living things and people, it changed the way I thought about a brand. It was no longer about, hey, just toss out whatever sounds good and hope that, it resonates with them. No, you can't get away with that in a real relationship. And when I started to realize this, it was early on in my business. And I was working with so many churches, helping them try to come up with new mission statements and a long list of values, all of which, hardly any of the staff could communicate. And at the time, I was newly married. Marriage teaches you a lot of things for sure. And one of the things it taught me was you can't get away with saying whatever you want, that if you communicate it, they expect it. Your spouse expects it. And so this is what formed a new belief in me and a new behavior for the way that we build brands and the way that I'm going to challenge you to build your brand. And so let me just explain to you what happened, and you can laugh at me, make fun of me, and some of you are going to relate to this because you probably live in the same environment that I have. And that is this. When I first got married, I would, first of all, you have to know this about me. I'm struggling right now trying to learn, do I have ADD? And if I don't, there's still things about ADD and characteristics and traits that you would see, which is one, I tend to procrastinate. I've always just said that's the creative in me. And I tend to, just put those things off. I'm also very passionate. You probably get that a little bit from just experiencing me even on this show together. But those two things are great when you're by yourself. But I married a wife who is maybe borderline OCD. And so think about an OCD person meeting the ADD. Nothing's the same, nothing at all. And so me who procrastinates is going up against someone who plans out everything. Me who is very passionate and able to be vocal is dealing with somebody who is a little more reserved and more of an introvert, which is great. But the differences created issues. And so I remember being in the car with my wife one day, and she was quiet. And husbands, you've all been there. You know that something's up when this happens and they're not saying a word. And I just asked, hey, what's wrong? And she just told me, she said, you've been telling me that you're going to get this list of things done. And you've been telling me that you're not going to raise your voice anymore. For some reason, she thinks when I get excited, I'm yelling. But I'm just excited. I'm passionate. But she kept saying, you keep telling me you're not going to do these things. And when you say it, I expect it. And I'm telling you, maybe 6 months into marriage at this point, I felt like the biggest failure. I thought, man, I'm disappointing her. And now, a few years later, I realized I'm going to disappoint her multiple times. But early on, it devastated me. But it was also the wake-up call that I needed. And it's funny, it was a personal wake-up call, but it sparked something in me for churches. And I thought, man, why would it be any different for a church? When you say it, shouldn't people be able to expect it? And so what I realized early on in my marriage was I can't be all things to my wife. It would be so hard for me to say that I'm never going to procrastinate. So what I told her is, look, I can't promise you that I'm never going to put things off. I can promise you I'm going to work at that. So that's kind of like something I value. It's a wish list. It's an aspiration. And then I told her, I can work at not raising my voice. Again, an aspiration, not a promise. But I did know, and I did realize right there, I said, but there are only two things for sure that I know I can promise, I can deliver on, because I know me, I know who I've always been, and that I'm going to love you like nobody else, and I'm going to be able to do whatever it takes to provide for our family. And those really boil down to, they seem simple and trite, maybe at the surface level, but if you get to know me and you learn more about me, you're going to realize that those things are rooted in a lifetime of promises kept in other ways that align with that. And so I realized realized, look, I can't promise all things to her, but I can promise something, 2 or 3 things that are going to make trickle down into our marriage and build a strong, healthy marriage, hopefully. And so what it did, now moving this over to your brand, bringing it back over, is you're in a relationship. You and your audience, it's a relationship. And if that's the case, what you say, they expect. And we need to start thinking like that as a brand. We can't just look at our brand and say, hey, we just communicate whatever we value. Because if you value it, I personally believe, and we're going to talk about this more in another episode, that you shouldn't have to say it. Your values should be experienced. And we're going to talk about that. It's another rule. But we have got to stop just communicating what we think people want to hear. You don't get to tell the story that you think is true. You have to live it out. Think about United Airlines recently. Everybody's very familiar with what just happened in the news with one of their flight attendants, I think, punching or hitting another passenger. What's terrible about this, the experience, yes, but this isn't about saying United Airlines is bad. This is about helping us understand that if you say it, we expect it. If you go to their website and you look at the shared values that they have, one of the things that they communicate on there is it says, we fly friendly. Warm and welcoming is who we are. And I guess you can laugh and say, well, that sounds stupid. That sounds, ridiculous for them to communicate that. But that's on a public, website. That is their statement of what we value and what they value. So if you're me and we're the customers in the audience, we expect that, don't we? What about your church? Let me just ask you, is there anything you're communicating right now that it sounds great? It looks great on paper. It's really inspirational to put that out there. But if you had to ask yourself, is it true everywhere in our organization? Or are we just finding a little glimpse to build on? Like we happen to be welcoming sometimes. And so we're building on that as that's who we always are. If you're building on glimpses of greatness, you've got it wrong for your brand. If you're promising things that you can't deliver, you've got it wrong for your brand. And it's really, I think there's never been probably more distrust towards the church. And that has to do with finances and other things. But, there's too much hype, I guess, around millennials. So I don't want to start the conversation around reaching millennials, but think about it. That generation that we're trying to reach, that we need to be reaching, there's a lot of distrust towards the church. The last thing we need to do is be known for communicating things that don't line up. And so what I mean by that is you can't get away with building a brand based on intentions. You build your brand based on your actions. And so your audience is looking at you and saying, is this true? If they communicate that they're welcoming, is this true? And that's something that I want to challenge you as a church to be able to look at, what you're communicating and asking yourself, hey, does this live everywhere? And so, look, this episode, for me, I guess the challenge to you is don't get so stuck on communicating, maybe what you thought you used to have to communicate, which is that, mission, vision, the values that you have. I would ask you, let's not be so worried about communicating things that are just based on hype. Let's not just go for those emotional feelings on the things that we hope, hit the right, message with people. Let's really communicate truth. I don't care, if you can't communicate, a lot of things. I'd rather you communicate less and do more and be more effective. For instance, with Circle 50, man, when I started as an agency, all of this, the stuff back to my marriage, working with churches that were communicating so many different things, what I saw was I was trying to be all things to everybody for so many years in my life, but then it translated into the business. And when I really looked hard at who we are, what I can promise on, what I know is always lived, what's alive now, and we can always promise on and deliver on, it wasn't a lot of things. I wasn't even embarrassed to say that. I was proud of it because it liberated me to feel like I don't have to be all things to everybody. And as a church, that's the first mindset that we probably have to have is just quit trying to be all things to everybody. Quit trying to communicate that you're all things to everybody. It's not even about that. You should welcome everybody, but I don't think everybody's meant to fit with your church. Otherwise, God would design it so that there's only one church. And so for me, identifying brand promises for me was the jumpstart for our company, even to know that, yeah, I can't promise a lot of things, but here's the things I can promise. One, I can promise that I'm going to invest before I ever ask anything of you. My clients will tell you that. My team will tell you that. That lives internally and it lives externally. I can promise you no fluff in the approach that I'm willing to put out content, even the way I want to talk to you and help challenge you. You're going to experience that. My team, they know they can come to me with anything if they don't like it. I'm always asking, what did I do wrong? What could I do better? And you can tell me like it is and shoot it straight. No fluff is just the way we are. And then just in respecting the reality of timelines and budgets and people's lives. That's the promises that I can deliver on. And there's so much more that's rooted in each of those. But those three promises right there create a very unique experience for anybody that works with us. We are not for everybody, and I know that. And it's liberating. It's exciting. And I wake up knowing that, and I don't ever doubt who we are and what we're doing because I know exactly who we are and who we're for. And so that's the beauty of even limiting your communication. It really more quickly and clearly tells an audience that this is either for them or it's not. And so in the book, Rebel Brands that I wrote, I go into some examples for you and I talk more about the stuff that I talked about with brand promises. And so I'm going to let you dive into that. I would love for you to go ahead and grab that book. And so that's going to be it for this show. I just wanted to use this show, not necessarily to, help you change everything you're communicating. I just want to start by challenging you to think about what you're communicating and what would look different if we built our brand on promises kept and not just a bunch of hype. What would look different for your church? And I think that's a good starting point for all of us here today. And so I'm going to go ahead and put up the show notes up on brilliantbrands.com, episode number 4. And I would love to take your questions, get your comments and your feedback on today's show. So just feel free to email me directly, justin@justinkeller.com. Feel free to mention me on social media and we can chat there as well using @KellerThinks. And it would mean a ton if you could head over to iTunes and subscribe and rate the show. Of course, that would mean a lot to me. And even more so, look, this show is personal to me. I want to help churches and church creatives think differently, and just like you're trying to right now. So it would mean a lot if you would share this with another creative out there, or a pastor, another church leader that you think would benefit from this. And I would appreciate that. Let's stay connected on social media and check out brilliantbrands.com, where you can learn more about how we're creating and helping you learn the new standard for church marketing and messaging. So, all right, make today great, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. The Brilliant Brand Show is powered by Circle 50 Creative. You can learn more about how we help ministries solve critical ministry moments with the right message, brand visuals, and strategies at circle50.com.